Hello, friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Before we get into our conversation, just a quick reminder about the Our Hearts Are Home conference for bereaved parents. It's scheduled for April 25th and 26th in Lynchburg, Virginia, and it will be a great opportunity to find community with other bereaved parents and to hear some amazing speakers. You can join in person or online, and you can register on their website at ourheartsarehome.org, and that link will be in the show notes for you. The cost is very affordable, and if finances are tight right now, there are scholarships available. Brad and I would love to see you there. Now, welcome to episode number 248, which is a continuation of my conversation with Jeannie Williams. Last week, we heard the story of her precocious and compassionate 11-year-old son, Jeffrey, who died from carbon monoxide poisoning in a hotel room in 2013, an incident that left Jeannie with permanent after effects as well. In this episode, she shares how grief has impacted her relationship with others, the challenge of answering the difficult question, how many children do you have, and the advice she would offer to newly bereaved parents. We also discuss the dangers of carbon monoxide poisoning, what she has learned from her own experience, and the precautions she now takes to protect herself and others. I believe Jeannie's words will encourage you wherever you are on your journey. So how has your experience with grief impacted your relationships with other people? Or has it?
I tend to keep more to myself. I'm not a very social person, I guess. During our homeschool days and years, I should say, loved it, loved being around the community of it. It was great. We all very like-minded in that, we're educating our children and wanting them to learn. And a lot of us moms, we were learning new things. So that was always fun. So enjoyed that. And that was a good commonality of things, something in common. And then when that world was gone, that world was gone.
Yeah. And for you, that world ended rapidly, suddenly.
And they have to keep on going. And naturally, of course, they're going to keep going, finishing their school years. Jeffrey was 11, so he was getting ready to go into this next group of classes, I guess, in our homeschool group, and he was really excited about that. But anyway, those families, they keep going and doing their. And for me at the time, it felt like if I came around, it was always almost like the elephant in the room sort of a thing.
Sure.
And I didn't like anybody feeling like that. And so I just, kind of disappeared, I guess you'd say. My daughter, it was the summer of her senior year. So instead of homeschooling, she went to a local private school for her last year because I wasn't in a place where she could have done her last year on her own. But at the same time, it was being home without Jeffrey there and just different. It was best for her. And the people at the school were that's what she needed. They were very supportive of her. If she needed just to go into the teacher's room or lounge or counselor's room or whatever and just cry for the day or whatever, they were there. And it was a Christian school, and they were very, very, very supportive. So that's what she needed. So, but as far as, I wouldn't say it's hurt the relationships, because I know if I ever needed anything from any of those friends, and if I called, and they were so supportive. I mean, they did so much. They set up like visit time with Jeannie where they would come and hang out with me, or do different activities or whatever. So they were great. But, life goes on and people do different things and different, your different circles. And if you don't have that common circle anymore, and you feel like the elephant in the room sort of thing. I just kind of backed away. So I don't know if that's really any much help for that, but I do have to be careful because I can catch myself staying by myself too much, or not, outside of my husband and my daughter, of course, but she's away. She doesn't live nearby. I do have to be careful that not let myself just want to stay in a cave, and when you need those friendships. And I do. I mean, I have needlepoint friends, and of course my older friends that other not older, but longtime friends. We'll have lunch together pretty regularly with one or two particular friends. So we do that. But it did change. It changed that relationship, and that was another thing to grieve. Really, really, that was really, really hard for me to adjust. Was losing that whole community. I mean,
Yeah.
that was hard.
Yeah, I understand that the homeschool community is a pretty tight community.
Mm-hmm.
And to lose that like that, like you said, that's just another aspect that you had to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Have you found a response that works for you when someone asks you, how many children do you have? As women who are meeting each other, ask each other all the time, how many children do you have?
Yes. At first, I used to when I knew that question was going to come up, if I was in a certain situation, new people or whatever, I could almost feel myself starting to sweat. I mean, or just my heart start pounding and pounding. What am I going to say? And the first time they said that, I said, I have two. And then I didn't say anything else. And then the next question, well, where are they?
Right.
And I'm like, I just couldn't ever say for me that I only have one. So the best answer for me was, well, I have my daughter Brienne and my son Jeffrey, who's with Jesus. And then they're like,
Right.
and the first a lot of times response is, oh, well, I'm sorry. And it's like, well, don't be sorry. He's with Jesus. So I'm going to be there one day too. So don't be sorry. So I just kind of that happened over time. That wasn't the first initial reaction. And then the other thing that I get that was hard then, it's not as much now, is, well, what do you do? Well, I'm recovering from carbon monoxide poisoning, so I don't really do anything right now.
Right. Sure.
And that was like, well, where do you work? Well, but
Yeah. Well, and sometimes when people ask that question and you say, well, Jeffrey's with Jesus, I imagine sometimes people would say, well, what happened?
right.
And for you, that's just a really difficult story to have to get into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of times I'll say just, he died from carbon monoxide poisoning in a hotel. So I would suggest travel with a carbon monoxide alarm and Google Jeffrey Williams or Jeffrey Lee Williams, and you can read all you want to read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess it's still out there. I'm not sure. I haven't Googled it in a long time, so I don't know if it's still, there may be another Jeffrey Lee that pops up. I don't know. But yeah, it does lead to an interesting conversation sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Sure. What advice would you give to a newly bereaved parent? Maybe someone who's listening to this episode who just lost their child a few weeks or a few months or maybe a year ago. What advice would you have for that mom or dad?
If someone reaches out to you that says they've lost a child, hang on to that number or text them back, because I mean, I hadn't known anyone who had lost a child before. No one in my inner circle nearby that I knew had ever lost a child before. So I felt like I was growing things out of my head and and I'm like, why? And I couldn't talk to anybody about it. There was nobody for me to say, am I going crazy? Until about 2 or 3 months after Jeffrey passed, a friend of mine says, I know a mom whose son has died. She lives here in Arkansas, but I'm going to give her your number. Can I give her your number? And can she reach out to you? And I said, please do. And her name was Nan Deal.
Mm-hmm. Our mutual friend.
Yeah. And so Nan was someone that I'd have to go back and try to find texts if I still have them. But it was the type of thing that, I mean, I could text her when it was the hurt was so bad, and just the grief and the confusion and all the things. And I could text her just, crying tears or praying hands or whatever the emojis were, if there were any in the background that day, or just pray or whatever. And it was just somebody that I could connect with, even if it was just for a split second, you know. And so I think it's such an individual event. Is that the right word? That it's really, you can't really write a playbook about what to tell somebody other than avoid feeling like you're alone, because there's, unfortunately, there are other moms out there or dads who have gone through this and don't feel like you have to do it alone.
Yeah, that's great advice. And what a gift that friend gave you when she gave you Nan Deal's phone number.
Yes.
I know how close the two of you have gotten over the years, and regular listeners to the podcast will recognize Nan's name because she's been a guest on here. I think 3 times she's been on, and she has quite a testimony herself of what the Lord has brought her through. And yeah, I'm so thankful that that friend gave you her number. What a life-changing event for you. And that is such great advice. If somebody gives you a number like that, or has a friend, if you hear from another bereaved parent, connect with that parent, because that's where you're going to find more understanding and more help than anywhere else, especially if that bereaved parent is also a believer and can point
Right.
you to
Like,
Jesus, point you to hope. That's the kind of friend you really need, for sure.
and I've reached out to some that I've known, through various ways, and notes or message or whatever. And sometimes they reach back, sometimes they don't,
Yeah.
and that's okay, and I just, I don't want anybody to feel like they have to, it breaks my heart to know that there's somebody else that would have gone through that for that long, that somebody didn't reach out, so reach out. And if someone does reach out, take that reach,
Yeah.
and just say, I'm, if you need it, if you need anything, I know what you're experiencing, let me know.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. I think all of us who have lost a child have this very sharp dividing line in our lives, separating the before and the after. Talk about the before Jeannie and now the after Jeannie.
I think the before Jeannie was more, we have to get this done. This has to happen. We got to do ABC. We have to do it in ABC order. We have things under control, which I don't really consider myself before Jeannie's control, but maybe control people don't realize they're controlling.
Yeah, probably
you
true.
know, I don't know. But very, I liked the plan things. I liked planning trips. I liked planning, trips. I mean, trips to the museum or local trips, field trips, I should say. Um, Enjoyed, I organized the testing for our group, for our homeschool group. And just now, after Jeannie, I think I'm not quite as like, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. Maybe we don't go ABC. Maybe we do AZ then C. And then, yeah, I think that's more of it. I mean, and I'm just a little bit more, is laid back the right word? I try not, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I still get anxious. I still get anxiety on things and wondering, what's this, all, that's normal type of, things that we can or can't control. That's pretty normal, I would think. But I'm just, yeah, I don't, it's hard to really put into words exactly the after Jeannie. But I think as my understanding as far as God's plans and what he has for our lives or my life, you think, okay, this is we're going along pretty good. This is our plan, or this is his plan. But then I've got a plan. And then something happens and you realize, I don't need to make all those plans sometimes. Or I just got to realize and understand or accept that his plans are better than any plans that I could make. And like I said, I don't have to do it in ABC form. I can do AZ and come back to C or B. And if that's how he wants to do it, that's how he wants to do it.
Yeah. Good advice. I think that's good. I'm a planner, and I tend to hold too tightly to my plans sometimes, and I need to be more open to that myself, realizing that God has a certain way that he wants it to be done. It may not fit my plans exactly. So I need to learn to let go a lot of times. Thank you. That advice just helped me. So do you have a favorite scripture or scriptures that have been an encouragement to you on this journey?
So, yes, Hebrews 6:19. This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, and one which enters within the veil. And then I think there's a song, and it's not coming to my mind, but one of the lyrics is, hope has a name,
Mm-hmm.
and his name is Jesus,
Yeah.
and he's my anchor.
Amen.
So I love the ocean and love water, and that's kind of my thing, I guess. Maybe that's the right word, but I love that visual of that anchor in that ocean and the waves that come, especially with the grief. I guess as you can look about that chart, that chart's like a wave,
Yeah.
my graph is like a wave. And that's my visual, is that no matter how high that wave goes or how low that wave goes or falls, he's my anchor.
Yeah. That was a special scripture to us too. So I love that that was yours. So let's talk just a little bit about carbon monoxide poisoning, because until I met you several years ago, I really knew nothing about it. I thought it was very rare, just a very unusual occurrence. But how common actually is it?
I think it's more common than we know or
Yeah.
we realize or that we hear. I remember my dad, he was a veterinarian, and we didn't travel a whole lot, but one of the summers he would go to these conventions. And I remember him asking and checking into a hotel, and he would want a room away from the pool. He didn't want to. And I always just thought it was because it was a chlorine smell. So this would have been like in the late 70s, I guess it was with my age. So mid to late 70s. And I know there were some incidences during those years. So I don't know if he had heard about it or whatever, but he's passed and I never could ask him. But it's just
Wow.
weird that I remember him doing that.
Yeah.
And then when I was home with Brienne, my daughter, when she was born, and I was still at home with her, and I remember watching one of those morning, magazine shows, and they were talking about home things. And the one thing they said is you need to have a carbon monoxide alarm at home if you have gas. Well, we had just built this new home, and we did have a gas fireplace. I'm from Florida. We didn't have gas fireplaces, so I remember seeing that, and my husband, I was like, he's like, okay, yeah, we'll get one. So we had one in our home, and I remember sitting on top of the refrigerator. I don't know why I put it on the top of the refrigerator, but that's where it went. But as far as an hotel room, Chris Hallschilt, her parents were Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, Daryl and Shirley Jenkins, who passed away in the hotel room before Jeffrey. She started a foundation called the Jenkins Foundation, and she has documented incidences that have been reported in the news. Being reported in the news is the operable word there.
Right.
Because I don't think they're all reported. Potentially. Maybe they're all. I don't know. That's the question, is how many of them are then come back and being reported. So she has started, you'll have to go back and look. I forgot what the first year was, but maybe in the 50s. Might not have been that long. It might have been before. But so she has, documented or whatever. And so she has a spreadsheet that you can see all the incidents that have it. There was an incident in Atlanta maybe a month ago, maybe it's a little longer than that. And I don't think they had carbon monoxide alarms in the room. I don't remember what the source was. A lot of times I used to get the Google alerts for whenever it was mentioned. Sometimes I read them, sometimes I don't. But so, yeah, it still happens. I mean, that was, a month ago? So it's, as far as the numbers, I think the CDC puts out, they have a number of people, whatever it is, that number of people that die a year. So 500 to 600 maybe, and that probably has changed. That includes, I mean, any type of source. That's a generator, that's a car. It's not pinpointed to a hotel.
Sure.
So you run into a different kind of category when you're talking about commercial property. So a commercial property, whether it be a hotel, nursing home, restaurant, anything like that, you think as a consumer, they're automatically going to have something like that. But unfortunately, with carbon monoxide alarms, there's a lot of degree or a wide variety of opinions about the importance of them. And even the building codes, International Building Code, I think is what's called, states, local governments, it just depends on whether they adopt those codes. Now, I think right now, newer hotels pretty much have them, but I still carry one. Mm-hmm. Because you don't know how old the hotel is, right, unless you happen to see it and you're there for grand opening. And even then, Chris does a much better job, and on her website, she has more details about that type of legislation and stuff. That's very much her wheelhouse, and she has a lot more information on there about that. But there's a lot of older hotels. So that hotel in Atlanta, it was older, I don't know how old, but they obviously weren't required to have one. And then there's differences opinions of, well, there might be a carbon monoxide alarm, but it only has to be around the room, around the source. So say you've got a room that has the hot water heater or your dryer or whatever it is. So any of the rooms around that, above and below it, those rooms should have carbon monoxide alarm. But my thinking is, okay, well, what if nobody's in those rooms to hear it and it seeps over to the other room or up above or down below? Because, in our case, even between the Jenkins's death and Jeffrey's visit, on the third floor, there had been a group of girls, I don't remember which time frame it was, that were in that third floor. And they were there like for a little birthday party, so they had gone swimming, and they came up to the room, and they all started getting sick. And they thought it was food poisoning or they got the flu, and they all left. And then, they tried to notify or, tell the front desk, something's not right. All these girls got sick in this room.
And that was the room right above where you and Jeffrey were? Wow.
Mm-hmm. 325. We were 225.
Mm-hmm.
They were 325. Yeah, it was right above. So it's mind-boggling to me. I mean, I understand why they don't go back and do it, because I guess I don't really understand, but their thinking is, well, that would take a lot to do something that's probably not going to happen. Mm. That would do a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of cost on something that just doesn't happen very often. Well, I don't care how often it happens. If it can happen, it can happen.
Yeah. And a carbon monoxide detector is not real expensive. I mean, that's a very insignificant expense.
But the other thing about it is, and this was an incident that happened, I forget how many years it was after Jeffrey's. There was an incident in Texas where the hotel had put in plug-in carbon monoxide alarms in the rooms. Well, one of them started going off, and people in that room just took the batteries out and didn't tell anybody. And it was a pool heater situation as well. And then I don't know if it was that same day, next day, I don't remember anyway, but the gist of it is, if you're going to do the plug-in kind, you need to educate your guest. This is what this does. If you hear a beep, don't take the batteries out, get out of the room and come tell us,
Yes.
So that, if you're going to do just the plug-in kind, you've got to have a little bit more. So that takes more effort. That takes more energy. That takes more detail. And hotels aren't just going to do that.
Right. Right.
But you as a consumer then take the risk.
Mm-hmm. But you have something that you use. You mentioned it a couple of times as we've been talking. It's a carbon monoxide detector you can carry with you.
Well, I have a first alert. It's just a regular carbon monoxide alarm. It's a 10-year battery, and you can turn it off and on. So I take that with me when I travel. Then, there are battery operated ones, but then you got to take the battery out and put it back in. Unless if you're going through, if you're traveling. If you're on the airplane, you don't do that. I guess you could in case it goes, But that's one I use because it's a 10-year battery. I don't have to worry about the batteries being replaced. So I carry that. For first responders, one thing that we try to advocate for was for them to carry always on monitor on their medic bags so that when they enter into a space, when they get a call and someone has passed out and they don't know why, whatever. So if they had that always on monitor on their medic bag, when they go in and that alerts, that tells them immediately, we got a situation here. We need to get everybody out.
Yes.
And that's not a standard type of piece of equipment, especially in our area. Now, I think up north, I think it's pretty standard. But in our area, I think it's kind of hit and miss. It just depends on the budget and what they think it's important to have something like that.
Yeah.
There is another carbon monoxide alarm. I haven't learned to use it in that it has to be calibrated. It's a little bit more, it's more sensitive than just your normal carbon monoxide alarm that you can get at the big box store. It's a little bit more detailed. And I think for me, it was just a little too complicated for me to feel comfortable to know what I was doing with it. I feel okay, and I feel confident and safe with these other alarms. I just put it right by my bed, on the nightstand, and that's what I use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good advice for people that might want to make sure that they're protected as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Changing subject. One more question I always like to ask before we wrap up. Has music been an important part of your grief journey? And if so, what is on your playlist?
Well, I don't have a playlist because I've never really learned how to make a playlist. I just have the good old free Amazon Music, and I go on their playlist that says worship or whatever they have different Christian music genres.
Perfect.
I think that's the right word, genres or different playlists. That's right. They have their automatic playlists.
Yep.
So I am more of, I'm just happy whatever's playing to hear, now I think back early on, there was a Casting Crown song and there was a hymn, and it may still be at the refuge. It was on a sign y'all had there, and I'm drawing a blank what the song was. Praise You in the Storm.
Praise You in the Storm. There we go. Mm-hmm. That was one of our favorites too.
Yeah. So I do remember that. Yeah, that's about the only one I can.
Mm-hmm.
I was never been one to remember song names and titles.
You just know a good song when you hear it, right?
I just know a good song when I hear it, and just soak it in. When I hear the song, I just soak it in and say, okay, what's the next song?
Yeah. That's perfect. That's perfect. All right. Well, we need to wrap up our conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we go?
Well, I just appreciate you so much. Your ministry, I tell so many people, well, bereaved parents and other people that haven't lost a child, but I tell them a lot about your ministry. I said, they've done this and all that you've done. And created, and just how I'm just amazed how much it has spread with the number of groups. When I see that, I'm just like, wow. And I think you recently posted a picture of your discussion group leaders, whatever the proper term is.
Our retreat facilitators or our support group facilitators.
Support. Yeah. The picture that you posted, I was like, look at all those people.
Yeah.
So I just think that I just see that as just this wonderful spreading of the web of things, and then just how much you have allowed the Lord to do that, and the blanket that He's given with your ministry, and how much I just know it's probably more than you'll ever really know, I guess, but that's okay. But I just think it's probably reached so many people in so many different ways.
Yeah, and we are grateful. We always say we're the ones who get the biggest blessing through the While We're Waiting ministry because of the people we get to meet and the stories of the children we get to hear. It's just such a gift, and we are grateful. And I'm grateful that I had the chance to meet you several years ago and have Jeffrey's story, and then we got to get reacquainted today. Thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you for letting me tell Jeffrey's story.
Yeah, we always love to talk about our kids, don't we?
Oh, yes.
All right. Thank you, Jeannie.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. If this podcast has been a blessing to you, please take just a moment to leave a rating or a review, and please feel free to share it with someone you know who might be helped by it. We're so grateful for all of you who come back and listen every week, and those of you who may be listening for the very first time. I hope God has used it to encourage you today and to help you live well while you're waiting.